Today, we have our colleague Chet Biscardi, who will be speaking on work that he completed during a course release during the 17-18 academic year. And it is on his research into a wide variety of non-musical influences on musical composition. So take it away, Chet.
Thank you, Conwell. Actually, it's probably ongoing work from the Greeks until forever, the idea of the creative process. First of all, thank you so much for trekking to Reisinger instead of being in Bates, cozy, eating a warm lunch. So it's much appreciated you came here. This new seminar workshop on the creative process that I'm going to be talking about is something that I've essentially been developing for my entire creative life. I probably need numerous other doctorates in order to actually teach this course, so I may reach out to a number of you, relying on your expertise in the many areas this course covers. I have so much material and so much to say about this that I can only share a few things with you today. So before I go to the course itself, I want to do three things. First of all, I want to give you a 30-second biography of Chet, to give you a context of my music, so you kind of know where I come from and really what has been with me since my childhood. I grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in a Catholic Italian immigrant family. I became an altar boy, good son, at the age of 7 and served Mass every morning at like 6 o'clock. And to Gregorian chant. The nuns actually wore habits, black habits, and it was quite an astounding thing to have that experience as a child, hearing that music done well in the church. Although I started writing music when I was about 9 years old, the first piece was called Happy and Sad, which is pretty much documents my entire output. I also played the accordion, the French horn, which I stopped pretty quickly because it was bigger than I was. I was even shorter then. This tiny little thing dragging this very heavy horn around. The violin, and then finally the piano. I actually didn't start writing music seriously until I was about 23. And I was actually going through a program to be a lawyer. And I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I basically did English literature as my undergraduate degree because I thought that was a good foundation to be a lawyer. But I also started studying Italian because my parents didn't want me to learn Italian because they wanted me to be American. So I did that, and I went on, instead of going to be a lawyer, I actually went into Italian literature, got a master's, and was finishing the doctorate in Italian literature when I started writing music again and showed the piece to the resident composer, and he says, "What the," and I won't put the expletive there, "are you doing in Italian? You're a composer." I went to Yale and I got my doctorate, so that's kind of the quick thing of it. But I can tell you that when I switched into music in Madison, because of all the work I had been doing in English literature and Italian literature, that really informed the way I was thinking about writing music, right from the beginning. One of my early pieces is called Tartini for violin and piano, which is based on having taken theoretically some ideas from the Devil's Trill Sonata. But more importantly was a piece called Indovinello, which was based on setting the text of the Indovinello Veronese, which is the first documented extant piece of Italian literature in the Latin Vulgate. And in fact, it was about the creative process. So that being said, talking about the creative process, I want to come to Sarah Lawrence. I started teaching here in 1977. In my second year, there's numerous kind of collaborative things that happened right from the start. My second year, Charlotte Doyle, thank you, invited me to be on a creative arts panel, and that was with the wonderful poet Jane Cooper and Brad Shore. I don't know if any of you know him or remember him. He was a cultural anthropologist at SLC at the time, and I think at that panel I talked about Eurydice, which is a piece that I set the text of H.D. about the female point of view of the Orpheus legend. And so it was early feminism, and I had some wild and interesting conversations with Adrienne Rich, Suzanne Hoover, who I think is here as well at the school now, but when she was first here. And I talked about my journal, which I've kept since 1972. In 1972 is when I really started writing music again, and I also identified as a gay man. So in a way, keeping a journal was sort of talking about both of those things. I still do. I do it daily. Now I do it at the computer. I've got many volumes, and I'm finding it very helpful for me to sometimes go back and look at things and see where I was and where I still am. Or maybe I've actually evolved. So I did that. The next thing was Alice Ilchman invited Alan Gurganis, the novelist, and I to do a convocation in 1986. And it was called Keeping a Long Work Alive, the making of an opera and a novel. I talked about my opera Tightrope, and he talked about his then just finished oldest living Confederate widow tells all. In 2003, the SLC magazine decided to run some panel features. And this one was called Who Are You? Was the first one. It was called Who Are You? Dialogue. And LGBT Studies ran a panel gathering 5 faculty to ponder any connection between our sexual identity and the work we compose, direct, perform, write, critique, or examine in the classroom. What is the relationship between sexual identity and creativity? And that panel was Julie Abraham, Dan Herlin, Jose Munoz, and Carol Zoroff. And then finally, in 2006, Charlotte again invited me to go on the faculty on the road to Boston, the alumni, to be on a panel called Navigating the Creative Process, and that was with Charlotte, Carol Zoroff, Leah Olson in biology, Fred Stripe. And the topic really was how is collaboration cross-curricular? The last thing I just want to mention, most recently, Shirley Kaplan, who came out today, and I collaborated on a work called Sailors and Dreamers, and the description quote is, Sailors and Dreamers pays tribute to the tides and the currents that carry us forward to the new and unexpected. So that's sort of the Sarah Lawrence background part of all of this. Now the third thing I want to do before I get to the course is actually play you a piece and talk a little bit about my creative process, at least with this piece, but in some ways this is telling of other works I do as well. In the course that you will see is called The Creative Process, Influence and Resonance. That could be 2 other words. That could be many, many other words. As I started to put words together to express what is it that moves us? What is it that we mimic? What is it that we push against? Harold Bloom's famous book, The Anxiety of Influence, and so on. These 2 words resonate for me, and I will get to that after I play the piece. But so in the category of influence, in the sense of quotation, using a brief musical quote from another composer as an homage. In this case, they're from Robert Schumann, who was a childhood love of mine, still is, and Toru Takemitsu, very wonderful Japanese composer for those of you who may know him. If not, he is somebody to familiarize yourself with. Then resonance in the sense of echo, or something that's ephemeral, from, in this case, Keith Jarrett, Aaron Copland, and Morton Feldman. And then resonance and influence together from a poem by Galway Canal, which actually titles this piece. So I'm going to play you those examples and then play you the whole piece. So first we start with Keith Jarrett from a 1999 recording. It was after he had had mono for 2 years, and these were Valentines to his wife. The recording is called Melody at Night with You, about as romantic as it gets. And the song is his arrangement of Something to Remember You By, which for me is also great with this whole thing of time unfolding and memory and things. Actually, I skipped one part, and that is you have this in front of you, the program note. But In Times Unfolding for Solo Piano was actually commissioned by the Musical Library Association for the 71st anniversary that happened to take place in New York City. And the head of it at the time asked me to write music that would look forward and reflect backward at the same time, whatever that means. So I thought about that a lot, and because it's been interesting to me to use influences not only from other music, but from literature, from painting, from architecture, from everything, actually. I started thinking about what I wanted to include, and as it says here, I created a work that reflects the past and celebrates the moment, in which time unfolds over a musical landscape that is at once poignant and painful, lonely, exuberant, heroic, and epic. So the first thing that I'm using, and you'll hear it in the first three, you'll hear it kind of, it's resonance in the first three measures of my piece, are the opening to this arrangement by Keith Jarrett, which is my piece, the opening. Robert Schumann, 1834 Carnival, Suite for Piano. This is the preamble, which I think if you know Schumann, you'll know this piece. Interestingly, and I actually didn't know this until I was preparing this for today, the opening of the Keith Jarrett is those two notes, which is a major second. In the Schumann, it's an E flat to an F. So that's there, and I didn't even make that connection. So in my piece, it happens midway through this piece, and it's really used as passing. It's like, here's Schumann, but I'm going to go forward. So this is that point in the piece. So it just goes by. Aaron Copland wrote piano variations in 1930, very thorny, very interesting, and I love Copland. And I love this idea of musical landscape, an American musical landscape which has a sense of openness. So I've used these kind of ideas. I have a piano concerto that kind of deals with this as well. But here's the opening of the 1930 Copland variations. Now, Copland doesn't even get a quote. He's a ghost. He appears, if those of you who read music on the page, on that page in the second system, it says Copland piano variations, the third measure, last measure. This is how it appears in my piece. Now, that may sound odd to do all of that and just have that, but for me, it has a very deep resonance, almost something spiritual about this, and it plays in the way the whole piece is connected, so that chord is wonderful. And in the same breath, Toto Takemitsu, in 1961, wrote a piano piece called Piano Distance, and in 1979, I wrote a piece called Mestiere. Now, what's complicated about this is mestiere in Italian is like French métier. Mestiere is what you do, what the piano does. I'd been writing pieces where I was using the inside of the piano and harmonics and all this stuff, and I thought, I just want to do what the piano does. It's incisive, it's lyrical, it's beautiful, it's sensuous. So that's this title, Mestiere, and it comes from actually the collected journals of Cesare Pavese from the first part of the 20th century. Anyway, so I took this chord, which you're going to hear, and there's a second chord, but the first chord I took, and then this three-note motif that comes down from that piece, the piano distance, to put in Mestiere. So here's Takemitsu's chord. mestiere, it comes toward the end and it reverses the order. The idea of 3 notes comes down and then the chord. Which is transposed. It's a whole step holder, higher. In A Time's Unfolding, where it says mestiere in the second thing, here's that chord transposed in mestiere in this piece. Now those last 3 measures, I'll play as a unit. One of the ideas of this course, as you'll see, is going to be about interpretation, and that has many manifestations, is what that means as well in all of the arts, whether it's literature, theater, dance, music. In 2009, Marty Goldray played this piece here as part of a concert called, or the whole thing was called Facing the Music. And I really learned a lot from Marty's performance that day. I think that he's one of the first pianists who I felt really got the overall architecture of the work, the long line. The long line is a term that actually Aaron Copland used. It's a wonderful idea of the breadth of a piece. He said how not to stop on the brief quote from Carnival, but use it as another passing moment toward the real event, where the harmony calls out, screams out in angst. He started the work so quietly that the sounds, not the chords, emerge from the piano and are not pulled out by fingers, hands, or anything. He makes us earn the loud, heroic moments when they finally come. This piece does not really have an obvious structure, although it does, but it's not obvious. And that's what's particularly difficult for performers to find in it when it's doing it, even when I've been working on it right now. And I wrote the piece, 19 years ago. It's hard. What's important about working with performers is that I really learn things, not only about the specific piece. Sometimes I end up maybe rethinking or revising or remixing some of the original ideas, and definitely I might bring that knowledge to other work. And the last thing I want to do is read you part 7 of a long poem by, and this isn't long, a long poem by Galway Cannell, which is in 11 sections. Which actually gives the title of this piece, as well as a sense of what it feels like as well. The poem is called When One Has Lived a Long Time Alone. When one has lived a long time alone, one knows that consciousness consummates. And as the conscious one among those others uttering their compulsory cries of being here, the least flycatcher witching up Chebec, or red-headed woodpecker clanging out his music from a metal drain pipe, or ruffed grouse drumming thrump, 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 deep in the woods, all of them in time's unfolding, trying to cry themselves into self-knowing. One knows one is here to hear them into shining when one has lived a long time alone. So, I gotta turn this back on. Oh, it is on. So that's a little bit of an idea of what I do with what I write and how I write it and what I do with it. It's 1:15, and I realize that this is needs to be a short thing, and I've just taken most of the time playing you some music, which isn't a bad thing. I'd like to introduce the course to you. I could illustrate each of the things, or I can just introduce it to you and have you ask me some questions about it. But I need to tell you a little bit about the genesis of this, in a sense, because as I said before, I've been working actually on the idea of non-musical influences on music composition for a long time. Obviously, this is part of my interest. But I realized, of course, that this absolutely crosses all the arts barriers. It even crosses sciences, and they all come into play in this discussion. So I was composer in residence at the Darlington College of Art in Devon in 2005, and I gave a master class on my music, and one of the faculty said to me, in your music, you really differentiate between influence and resonance. That seems like a very small thing to say, but I thought, well, that's really interesting, because that's really true. You know, what I actually go out and take, even quote exactly to a certain extent, and what I, as in this piece, just have this little hint of Copeland, this little echo, little ghost-like thing. So that really started me thinking about what kind of a course could I bring together that brings together all of the arts. And I've had really wonderful experience of being at many artist colonies around the world. The MacDowell Colony first up in New Hampshire, before that actually at the American Academy in Rome. In any case, in all of these cases, you're always thrown together with mostly artists, but also scholars, especially at the American Academy in Rome. And one of the great things about it is that there's a dialogue among everyone at breakfast and at dinner and other times that really show the strong interconnections across all disciplines and the collaborative work that can be made if you want to do so. So that dialogue is invaluable, I think, for cross-media experiences. And for me, I've actually thought of this seminar workshop as a resident artist colony. I mean, I really think of this course as a hands-on, get your hands dirty in really making new work, original work, and also working with other people who are struggling with the issues of being creative. So if you have the handout of the course. I'll just read it quickly as a way of just going there. I'm doing this next spring. It's still up in the air whether this is going to be a 3-credit course or a 5-credit course, and whether it's going to have conferences. I had one idea the other day, which I'll talk to the deans about. But this seminar workshop is for advanced students. I really want people who are living their art. This is what they do. In all of the creative arts. Composers, choreographers, writers, and visual artists. And I mean everybody. It could be somebody doing video games if they are really doing it on a level where they can really are open to other experiences, who are interested in the process of developing original material. There is no singular creative path, but each artist needs to confront the past in order to find a unique vision, a unique voice. We will examine various influences on creative thought, finding resonant clues and methods in areas outside of one's chosen creative field. What makes you uncomfortable is going to be part of this as well. In each session, the point of departure will always begin with music, where, for instance, influence may be understood as direct musical quotation from a specific composition, or, for instance, a structural idea based on a literary or visual image. I wrote an orchestra piece for the Rome Symphony called At the Still Point, which deals with a theoretical thing called frozen registration that Stockhausen invented back in the late 60s. I'm not going to go into that, but it has the idea of like stasis. And there's something about that that's very Japanese as well, and those Japanese influences are important to me as well. And so that piece really is based on Burt Norton images from T.S. Eliot's Burt Norton. While Resonance is about incorporating without actually imitating another composer's particular sound or translating in music the color and texture of a painting. My piano sonata back in the mid-'80s is actually based on seeing a lithograph triptych that was made from a triptych of paintings that Jasper Johns made into lithographs, and then was hung at MoMA in three panels form. So they were basically kind of like you could just mix things up. And I like that idea of not only structure from that painting choice, but the fact that painting as canvas is true for musicians, John Cage, Morton Feldman, all of those people from the mid-century, and other things. So since the world is rich with collaborative interconnections, we will explore everything that might have an impact on making new work, from musical antiquity to far reaches of technology, as well as ritual and myth, the role of nature, art and architecture, literature, memory, politics and protests, nationalism in global countries. This is where my PhDs are lacking. Along with assigned readings and listening to and looking at various media, students will actively seek out and document sources of inspiration. That to me is very exciting, and there's a whole, I've been doing this for the past year actively, and I have boxes and folders. I just brought these few things here because every day I open up the New York Times and I find another article that's relevant to this topic because it's all over the place. So I want students to go and find that out depending on the specific topic we're doing from week to week, and bring those things in. They're going to be keeping a journal and other guidelines for them of what that means, not only about documenting what their piece that they're developing is and how they're doing it, but answering many other questions. The term will culminate class presentations on either a new work or an in-depth paper based on research, and this will be offered as either probably mostly a creative arts course, but it could also be a humanities course if they actually do a research paper on this stuff. So you also have the list of, this is kind of like a rough draft of the weeks, 15 weeks. Where's my copy? Oh, yeah, so it starts, the first session will start with called the Anxiety of Influence. Talk about the Harold Bloom, and there's this wonderful book by Joseph Strauss, who's a great theoretician who teaches at CUNY now. He talks about Stravinsky, Schoenberg, Bartók, Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg, and they're confronting their German forebears. And it's very interesting because it's about how people are pushing back, or Harold Bloom, if you know the book at all, it talks about misprision and what's misleading, but it's always about how do you find your unique self, and the fact that there are all these gigantic figures that have come before you. Musical past, musical antiquities, borrowing and metaphor, the roles of interpretation, improvisation and sampling, literature, text, poetry, lyrics and translation, and there's a lot of subcategories I have, art, architecture and photography, acoustics and technology. I ride occasionally with Jerry, every week with Jerry Dodds, and we talk about this stuff, and it invariably ends up in a conversation about this in one way or another, and it's fascinating. We got into a really interesting conversation about the word influence in art and how it's not used. Anyway, acoustics and technology, theater, dance and film, memory and the brain. By the way, theater, dance, and film. The other day on Saturday, I went to the matinee performance of the New York City Ballet doing the 3 Greek pieces by Stravinsky and Balanchine, Apollo, Orpheus, and Aegon, and it was mind-blowing because they are really thinking that way together, the way they make work. The memory and the brain, creativity, emotions, and symbols. This is a new book. This is Posthumous Essays by Oliver Sacks. His article on the creative self is so astounding. I mean, I know that a lot of academics don't like Oliver Sacks because he's so engaging and clear. The fact is that it's brilliant what he says. If we had time, I would read you a paragraph from it because it really almost made me cry. He talks about everything from childhood and the need to have experience and mimicry, and where does imitation and mimicry stop and the real artist emerge. It's a wonderful read. It's a great book. Politics and protest, nationalism, going all the way back to Isaac, people write Chopin, people writing about music that has to do with the culture and that they're living in. The influence of place, I think, is important, especially the American experiment and global culture. Coda, everything is holistic. The world is of a piece, and music connects everything. And the last 2 sessions will be presentations. So, I mean, literally, I could stand here probably for the next 3 months and talk to you about this. I'm very excited about this material. So, with all that being said, any of you have any questions? Yes.
It was really fascinating to hear about all the influences and to hear them and then to hear the piece. I'm interested in how you started and then at what point did these different influences come in?
Fair question. I can say for certain I never start, with musical ideas. Those are things that as I'm working along, I think like, there's something I'd like to say here that has a width of Copland or Gershwin or maybe Schoenberg. Actually, I was writing this piece Mestiere for piano. It goes all the way back to '79. I was talking to a student about that yesterday because I was my second year here, and I was sitting in my studio and I was playing it really, really fast. And Kitty Rose, this wonderful, wonderful voice teacher and human being, stopped by the door and she looked in and she said, "Why are you playing that so fast? Those are beautiful notes. Play them slower." So I did, and she was right. But in that piece, at a certain point, I realized I wanted to pay homage to this idea of frozen registration, but not with Stockhausen. So I looked to the third movement of Schoenberg's Colors or Farben for 5 pieces for orchestra, and I brought it in at that point. So people who know that piece kind of hear it. If you don't know it, it's all right, because it still makes musical sense in the piece. I've written pieces. I have a big percussion symphony that is called Trasuminar, another Italian word. Not all my pieces are in Italian words, but Trasuminar means transhumanizing. It does not exist in the language. Dante coined it in the Paradiso, where he's finally looking at God, and he's going like, what? How can I, as a human being, look at this? And so this piece actually ended up being, I was really attempting to reach beyond what I could reach to say, yes, let's transcend. But of course, nothing stays that way. All just falls down to earth. So at that point, actually, the idea of Trasuminar from the Dante came in. So it's a mix of things, but that's a great question. Yeah. Yes?
Do you find that a piece being commissioned by someone influences your process and how you write it?
Totally. Well, I mean, if a soprano is commissioning a song, I'm writing for her voice, or baritone, his voice. So that's kind of an obvious thing. Yes. I mean, if an ensemble commissions me, I have a sense of what their spirit is. And so I'm going to want to sort of connect it to that ethos of that. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for, oh yes, hi.
Could you go into a little more detail about your process in actually creating, in unfolding, and when did you discover that the 11-verse poem would be helped to come up with that title? This poem.
Yeah. I don't remember when I read the Galway Canal. It wasn't like it must have been during. I'm trying to remember, I may have been at a colony at that moment and found it. But when I found it, I thought like, oh, I mean, that's the thing that's exciting about being a creative artist, is that kind of like, oh, that moment, you know, you're slaving trying to figure out what you're doing. I sit at the piano, I became sort of the laughing stock of the McDonald colony one day because I'd go off to my studio in the morning and I'd write, and I'd come back and I'd say, well, I added one note. And then I'd go out the next day and come back and I'd say, I erased that note. I mean, it's so difficult, you know? So when those moments come, I was telling a composition student yesterday about this issue of when you just, you know when you found the right thing. And it's not theoretical, it's not academic, it's what's in your body and what you feel. So I can't remember specifically when I came upon that, but I looked at it and said, oh, of course. And I think also the kind of sentimental nostalgia thing of when one has lived a long time alone doesn't escape any of us to a certain degree. Yes?
I've told you this many times, I love this piano piece.
Thank you.
And I've got a chance to play through it a few times myself and noticed that there was a self-quotation from the earlier song of yours called Someone New.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could talk about self-quotation, how that relates to the topic of the piece.
Wow, I mean, certainly, you know, what I wish I had the time to do, and by the way, I'm just going to point out this book to you because I'm going to answer that question. It's a really important one. A friend of mine just sent this to me a couple of weeks ago. It's called Theft. It's a little bit like Abby Hoffman's book, like Seal This Book, you know, but it's written by two lawyers from Duke University. And it pays homage to Grout's The History of Western Music, which is what I use in the survey course and in my first year studies, but it's a graphic book. And it talks about Western music. It's brilliant, actually, but its real point of view is about borrowing and the business of music. So this idea of like, you know, borrowing from other composers is one thing. Certainly, you know, the second Viennese school of Schoenberg, Weber and Berg were, you know, working against their forebears. But then you have the first Viennese school of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, who borrowed from a lot of different people, especially from Papa Haydn. You know, this idea of borrowing things, but people taking things. Carson probably could answer this, and Marty could answer this much better than I about Bach taking things from earlier works and reworking them. Yes, I do that a lot, and not so because like, oh, I have no idea here. I'll just steal this thing from an earlier piece that works. But that again, it's like a reference to an emotional state, mostly, I think. Or if there's a thematic idea, a melodic idea that seems really interesting, and so in this piece, actually, what I didn't talk about, I'd written Morton Feldman's companion piece, which was something that I played here in October, and I wrote a piece called what was this piece called? Extension 3 for solo piano. I based a piece called Companion Piece for Morton Feldman on that. In this piece, I kind of like go to that, but that's really resonance. It's a very subtle hint. In it are quotes from my piano concerto, from a work written for soprano and piano called Recovering, based on the poetry of Muriel Rukeyser, whom I first saw on this stage in 1978. It was a day in honor of the celebration of Muriel Rukeyser. It was extraordinary. Ellis, Color Purple, Ellis Walker was here, Jane Cooper, Adrienne Rich, Denise Levertov, who's one of her poems I set years later. So that's in there. There's a feeling of that in there. So I go to other things. I mine my own stuff for feelings and musical ideas. Yeah?